Session 7, welcome.
Thank you. What are we discussing today?
We're on letter number 10.
All right, so we left off in session 6 with the letter that had been sent from Hume to KH, and it was returned not to Hume, but to Sinnett. And then he had made some notes. He had marked some specific sections in the letter. It wasn't real long, but he made some notes, and then he remarked, and the remarks were not for Hume, they were for Sinnett, so that he could understand what KH was having to deal with in his interaction with Hume, which was a difficult situation. He was dealing with a person who was very proud of himself, of his intellect and his knowledge, and doing everything possible to convince KH that he, Hume, was KH's superior in knowledge and wisdom and understanding. The only difference was that KH had some specific knowledge and abilities. Magic, exactly, which Hume did not have. So he's basically trying to convince him that if he would give that information to him, he would be able to save the world, more or less. And KH is far wiser than that. He knows that that isn't the case, that that isn't what would happen, and that there would be serious consequences if that were to occur, even if it was possible, which it was not. So now we're on letter number 10, which is a letter to Sinnett. And let's see, this is the first letter where the text and the signature are in the same handwriting. It may be that it did not come through HPB, but through a chela in Ambala, who may have performed the service for him. So in many instances, KH projected the image of a letter to the brain of one of his chelas, and then that chela either caused it to be precipitated or actually wrote it in KH's handwriting. But it was still enough of a difference that you could tell it wasn't actually his handwriting. This one was apparently completely in KH's handwriting. He may have written it out by hand, physically, and was able to mail it from Ambala. So we're not sure. All we know is that Sinnett did receive the letter.
But it's assumed that others had come through HPB either through her handwriting, in his handwriting,
I don't know if she ever hand wrote any of them.
Through HPB.
Through HPB, but I assumed that when it was sent through her, that it was done through precipitation. Now, later we're going to learn that some of these methods were prohibited later. They were allowed in the beginning, but then later on, his superiors cut back on the amount of power that they were able to use. And so they had to restrict themselves to only certain methods of writing. So go ahead and read this letter.
Letter number 10, received after December 1st, 1880. My dear friend, I have your letter of November 19th, abstracted by our special osmosis from the envelope at Meerut, and yours to our old lady in its half-empty registered shell, safely sent on to Kanpur to make her swear at me. But she is too weak to play at the astral postman right now. I am sorry to see that she has once more proved inaccurate and led you into error. But this is chiefly my own fault, as I often neglect to give her an extra rub over her poor sick head now, when she forgets and mixes up things more than usual. I did not ask her to tell you to give up the idea of the AI branch, as nothing would come of it, end quote. But, quote, to give up the idea of the Anglo-Indian branch in cooperation with Mr. Hume, as nothing would come of it. I will send you his answer in my letter to my final epistle, and you will judge for yourself. After reading the latter, you will please seal and send it to him, simply stating that you do so on my behalf. Unless he asks the question, you better not let him know you have read his letter. He may be proud of it, but should not.
Okay. A few things to point out here. So he had Senate had sent a letter to HPB to forward to him by psychic means. And KH, who was aware of it and didn't want her to have to expend that energy, took it out while it was in the postal system.
Manipulating things.
Yeah. So she would have received a half-empty envelope, and he was quite sure it was going to make her swear at him. HPB, they always talk about HPB's swearing, but when they talk about swearing, it's not what we think of today. It's more words like damn and hell and
confounded.
Yeah, things like that that are so mild that we wouldn't even think of it as swearing today. Let's see, what else? He says, after you have read the letter, seal it up and send it to him, but don't tell him
You read it.
you read it unless he asks. So notice that's kind of important to pay attention to. Unless he asks. So he wasn't telling him to lie.
Right.
Remember, KH had never told a lie in this lifetime. And he wasn't going to ask someone else to lie on his behalf or on something that he had shared with someone else. So he said, unless he asks. So that's an important qualification. Go ahead.
Okay. My dear good friend, you must not bear me a grudge for what I say to him of the English in general. They are haughty, to us especially, so that we regard it as a natural feature. And you must not confound your own private views, especially those you have now, with those of your countrymen in general. Few, if any, except for those like yourself, would ever consent to have a nigger for a guide or leader.
All right, now we're going to address this because they use this word more than once. And in those days, it was very common to use it. It was a put down. It was meant to show superiority of the white race. But it wasn't quite the pejorative that it is today. So when we see it in documents, historical documents like this letter, it's important to keep it in context of the time period. It wasn't a good term to use, but it was used constantly, and the English thought nothing of it. It simply meant what would be the equivalent of darky, because it comes from the word that means black. So it's just that in the historical context, we have to see things as they would have been seen by the people involved at that time.
And this same tone vibrates in your own remark about, quote, a man of the people unused to refine ways, unquote. And, quote, a foreigner but a gentleman, end quote. the latter being the man to be preferred.
So what he's pointing out here is the, how would you call it? The kind of double-edged sword that Sinnett was using. A foreigner, but a gentleman, meaning that most foreigners wouldn't have been considered gentlemen. But a foreigner, but a gentleman was a little bit better than just a foreigner.
But you need not tremble for me. Whenever I make my appearance, whether astrally or physically, before my friend A.P. Sinnett, I will not forget to invest in a square of the finest Chinese silk to carry in my choga pocket, nor to create an atmosphere of sandalwood and cashmere roses.
All right. So a choga is one of those loose short jackets that they would wear, and he doesn't want to embarrass Sinnett, so he says, if I ever appear to you, I'll make sure to put a piece of Chinese silk as a handkerchief in my pocket.
And wear some incense.
And surround himself with the scent of sandalwood and roses. And there actually is something that is sometimes referred to as the odor of a saint. Supposedly, when certain very spiritual individuals appear, they will have some kind of a scent, either sandalwood or roses or gardenias or something of that nature, because they can create around them whatever atmosphere they choose to. If they aren't used to a hot climate, they might bring a climate of cooler weather, cooler air around them. So they can choose whatever they want.
This is the least I could do in atonement for my countrymen. But then, you see, I am but a slave of my masters, and if allowed to gratify my own friendly feeling for you, and attend to you individually, I may not be permitted to do as such for others. Nay, to tell the truth, I know I am not permitted to do so, and Mr. Hume's unfortunate letter has contributed much to it. There is a distinct group or section in our fraternity who attend to our casual and very rare accessions of another race and blood, and these brothers do not habitually use floral essences.
So they're not going to bother with the niceties to make themselves appear more acceptable to these foreigners. But it's interesting to note that there are specific members of the Brotherhood who do interact with foreigners. And I'm assuming that that would be because of their understanding of their culture and their ways, and each one has his own specialties.
So the test of the 27th was no test phenomenon? Of course. But did you try to get, as you said you would, the original manuscript of the Jhelum dispatch? Though our hollow but plethoric friend, Mrs. B, were even proved to be my multum in parvo, my letter writer, and to manufacture my epistles, yet unless she were ubiquitous or had the gift of flying from Amritsar to Jhelum, a distance over 200 miles, in 2 minutes, how could she have written for me the dispatch in my own handwriting at Jhelum, hardly 2 hours after your letter was received by her at Amritsar? This is why I was not sorry that you said you would send for it, for with this dispatch in your possession, no detractor would be very strong, nor would even the skeptical logic of Mr. Hume prevail.
So remember the letter where K.H. was traveling by train, and he received this letter from Sinnett while he was in the train. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure it didn't have telegraphs on the trains in those days. They did have them at the train station, but not on the trains. So he was trying to show Sinnett that they had set up this on purpose, that this was actually a proof of their ability to transmit things instantaneously. And yet, Sinnott kind of dropped the ball when he said that he was going to go to the telegraph office and get the original telegram and keep it because he was entitled to do that. Mm-hmm. So what happened in this case was that he gave the letter to HPB. She transmitted it psychically to KH, who was on the train. He stopped at the next stop and sent a telegram to Sinnott to acknowledge receipt of the letter. And that whole scenario proved that there was an instantaneous transfer of this letter. But Sinnott hadn't followed up on it. He did later because he then realized the importance of getting that telegram.
Had you first printed the account of the teacup phenomenon, the Times of India could never have published A Day with Madame Blavatsky, since that nice bit of American sensationalism would not have been written by Alcott at all. Sinnott would have written the article.
Yeah, so remember the letter or the article that Alcott printed, sent to Damodar in Bombay, and was subsequently printed without permission by the Bombay Times, and caused such an uproar among the Englishmen who had attended this picnic where the teacup was phenomenally produced. What he's saying is, if you, Sinnott, had written the article, you would have known that it would be inappropriate to divulge the names of these people, and you would have been a lot more circumspect. But since you didn't, Alcott felt the need to share it with the world.
Anxious to collect for his society every proof corroborative of the occult powers of what he terms the first section, the Mahatmas and their chelas, and seeing that you remained silent, our gallant colonel felt his hand itch until it brought everything to light, and plunged everything into darkness and consternation. Did you write tune? Well, well, I must ask you to buy me a pair of spectacles in London. And yet, out of time or out of tune is all one as it seems.
All right, so what he's referring to here is letter number 5, where Sinnott had written that Alcott was out of tune with Englishmen and English thinking. And KH had misread it as out of time. So he's making a joke of it and saying, I guess you're going to have to buy me a pair of spectacles when you're in London, because that was a plan, is that Sinnott was going to have a vacation and was going to be traveling to London. And so he's saying, while you're in London, maybe you better buy me a pair of spectacles.
But you ought to adopt my old-fashioned habit of little lines over the M's. Those bars are useful, even though out of tune and time with modern calligraphy. Besides, bear in mind that these, my letters, are not written but impressed or precipitated, and then all mistakes corrected.
And you will see that if you look at the images of some of these letters. You will see where they were corrected. So they imprint them with their magical means, and then they're reviewed. And any errors are removed. And you can actually see the smudge where the ink is removed and then something else is impressed on top of it.
So when we hear the word impressed, does that mean there is a physical force causing the ink to appear somehow? Or what is meant by precipitated? Just appearing?
They collect atoms from the surrounding area to create whatever they need, whether it's ink or any other material. So it is collected, and then, as you pointed out before, sometimes it appears like it's on the surface, and that's usually an indication that it was actually handwritten, but sometimes it looks like the ink is embedded within the fibers. And that's what he's talking about by impressed in this sense.
Is he referring to impressed and precipitated as the same process?
I think so. Mm-hmm. I'm not certain, but I think it is.
And I know we're going to talk about this more later, but it's fascinating. Has that been looked at by scientists in modern day to verify there was no pen that did this?
I don't know about scientists, but I do know that there was a person who was an expert in forgery. He worked for banks to detect counterfeit money, for example, and he was an expert in forgery. He examined some of these, and he said there is no way that this was written.
A pen. Or ink.
Whatever the process is, he said, I can't explain it, but it was not written by a pen.
Wow. They should have it analyzed by scientists. We will not discuss at present whether your aims and objects are so widely different from those of Mr. Hume's, but if he may be actuated by, quote, a purer and broader philanthropy, unquote, the way he sets to work to achieve these aims will never carry him beyond pure theoretical disquisitions upon the subject. No use now in trying to represent him in any other light. His letter that you will soon read is, as I say to him, a monument of pride and unconscious selfishness. He is too just and superior a man to be guilty of petty vanities, but his pride climbs like that of the mythical Lucifer, and, you may believe me, if I have any experience in human nature when I say that this is Hume, au naturel. Wow. That's
in his natural state.
Wow. It is no hasty conclusion of mine based upon any personal feeling, but the decision of the greatest of our living adepts, the Chaperon of Tan La. Of whatever question he, Hume, touches, his treatment is the same, a stubborn determination to make everything either fit his own foregone conclusions or sweep it away by a rush of ironical and adverse criticism. Mr. Hume is a very able man, and Hume to the core. Such a state of mind offers little attraction, as you will understand, to any of us who might be willing to come and help him.
All right, a couple of points. His pride climbs that of the mythical Lucifer. Remember when he talked about the imaginary God of the Christians? Mm-hmm. And now he's talking about the mythical Lucifer. So it certainly appears that he doesn't believe that either one actually exists. What does exist is the thought form, an enormous thought form on the astral plane that holds all of these ideas that billions of people have about God, various gods, and also various demons, including Satan, Lucifer, the devil. He's known by many different names. And it wasn't until, I think, the 15th century that he became known as Lucifer. I don't think the Bible mentions the word Lucifer, if I'm not mistaken. It only mentions the devil, a generic term. The other point was that such a state of mind as Hume's offers little attraction to any of us who might be willing to come and help him. Mr. Hume is not, despite the fact that he is extremely intellectual and capable, not the type of person that they are looking for in a chela. He's actually extremely difficult to work with, and the biggest obstacle is his ego.
Well, he's a know-it-all. How can he be taught anything if he
exactly.
Everything?
And his ego is as big as a football field.
Soccer field.
Soccer field.
Yeah.
Well,
I know.
Football
I'm
is
being
soccer.
Funny. I know. No, I do not and never will despise any feeling, however it may clash with my own principles, when it is expressed as frankly and openly as yours. you may be, and undoubtedly are, moved by more egotism than broad benevolence for mankind. Yet, as you confess it without mounting any philanthropical stilts, I tell you candidly that you have far more chances than Mr. Hume to learn a good bit of occultism. I, for one, will do all I can for you, under the circumstances, and restrained as I am by fresh orders. I will not tell you to give up this or that, for unless you exhibit beyond any doubt the presence in you of the necessary germs, it would be as useless as it would be cruel. But I say, try, do not despair. Unite to yourself several determined men and women and make experiments in mesmerism and the usual so-called spiritual phenomena. If you act in accordance with prescribed methods, you are surely to ultimately obtain results. Apart from this, I will do my best, and who knows, strong will creates and sympathy attracts even adepts. Ooh, this is good. Whose laws are antagonistic to their mixing with the uninitiated.
All right, let's point out a couple of things here. Let's see. First of all, the difference between the temperaments and the attitudes of Sinnett and Hume. Obviously, K.H. thinks that Sinnett is a much better candidate for what they have in mind, even though Hume has far more knowledge and is a more intelligent person.
Hume is decidedly more intelligent than Sinnett?
Oh, yes. Very definitely. However, Sinnett is a little more malleable. He's someone that they feel is going to be receptive to their ideas and to their teachings and will be willing to think about them and contemplate and then transmit them. Hume, on the other hand, is immediately going to think he has better ideas. And he's not going to be very receptive to anything different from what he already believes. I have to kind of give credit to Hume, though. Believe it or not, he actually did have a certain sympathy for the Indian people.
He wouldn't be there if he didn't have something. Right?
In some ways, well, he was there for his personal benefit.
Business.
That wasn't the reason. He later was the founder of a political party that is still in existence today, the India Congress Party. And it still exists. And if you look it up in Wikipedia, it will tell you that he was considered the founder of that party. And it was one that Eddie Besant belonged to later and worked with. So he did have a lot of care and concern for the Indian people, but he also recognized or thought that he was by far their superior.
If you are willing, I will send you an essay showing why, in Europe more than anywhere else, a universal brotherhood centered around one dominant idea is necessary for successful achievements in occult sciences. What one will fail to do, the combined many will achieve. Of course, you will have, in case you organize, to put up with Alcott at the head of the parent society, hence, nominally, the president of all the existing branches. But he will be no more your leader than he is the leader of the British Theosophical Society, which has its own president, its own rules and bylaws. He has no right to interfere either with your administration or modes of action, so long as these do not clash with the general rules, and he certainly has neither the ability nor the desire of being your leader. And of course, you, meaning the whole society, will have, besides your own president chosen by yourselves, quote, a qualified professor of occultism, end quote, to instruct you. But, my good friend, abandon all notion that this, quote, professor can bodily appear and instruct you for years to come. I may come to you personally, unless you drive me off, as Mr. Hume did. I cannot come to all. You may get phenomena and proofs, but even were you to fall into the old error and attribute them to spirits, We could but show you your mistake by philosophical and logical explanations. No adept would be allowed to attend your meetings. Of course, you ought to write your book. I do not see why it should be impracticable. Do so by all means, and any help I can give you, I will. You ought to put yourself immediately in correspondence with Lord Lindsay, and take the Shimla phenomena and your correspondence with me as the subject. He is intensely interested in all such experiments, and being a good theosophist and on the General Council, is sure to welcome your overtures. Take the ground that you belong to the TS, that you are the widely known editor of the Pioneer, and that, knowing how great an interest he takes in the spiritual phenomena, you submit to his consideration the very extraordinary things which took place at Shimla. The best of British spiritualists could, with proper management, be converted into theosophists, but neither Dr. Wilde nor Dr. Massey seem to have the requisite force. I advise you to confer personally with Lord Lindsay upon the theosophical situation at home and in India. Perhaps you two might work together. The correspondence I now suggest will pave the way.
So, Sinnott is already thinking about writing a book. Remember, he's planning to go to London, and he's all excited about the information and the experiences that he has had so far. And he asked if he, meaning KH, would allow him to use some of these in a book. And he said, by all means, please share them with the world.
That's awesome.
And so he was planning to write it during the month-long voyage to London. So he was gone for 4 months. 1 month going there, 2 months in London, and then another month on the return trip.
A month to travel, wow.
And Lord Lindsay obviously was had the title, an English title. He was a very prominent British man, and he was also a member of the society. He was quite interested in theosophy. They actually got some really good members. William Crookes was one of them, who was a member of the Royal Academy. This was later, in 1884, I believe. So they did get some very well-known English people who joined the society.
Even if Madame Blavatsky might be induced to give the Anglo-Indian Society any practical instruction, I'm afraid she has remained too long a time outside the adytum to be of much use for practical explanations.
All right, he uses the word adytum, which is a Latin word, and it means the inner sanctum, the Holy of Holies, the part of the temple where no one but the initiates, the ones who are consecrated, can go.
However, though it does not depend upon me, I will see what I can do in this direction. But I fear she is sadly in need of a few months of recuperative villeggiatura on the glaciers with her old master before she can be entrusted with such a difficult task.
Well, villeggiatura is obviously an Italian word, but it means a retreat, a long vacation in one spot.
Be very cautious with her in case she stops with you on her way down home. Her nervous system is terribly shaken, and she requires every care. Will you please spare me needless trouble by informing me of the year, date, and hour of Mrs. Sinnott's birth? Ever yours sincerely, Kuthumi.
Will you please spare me the needless trouble by informing me of the year, date, and hour of Mrs. Sinnott's birth? Now, why in heck would he need that? Obviously, to do her astrological chart. KH obviously believed in astrology. I doubt very much that he believed in it the same way that people do today, but he obviously was convinced that there were some practical uses for it, and that it did have some validity. I wish we had one of the adepts who was willing to take the time to update astrology. Many years ago in the 1970s, I studied astrology in San Francisco under one of the best teachers at the time, Doris Doan. And I learned it, but I became very disillusioned with it. I was convinced that there was something to it, but I was also convinced that we don't know enough about it to use it in a practical manner today. It's more of a, what would you call it, a superstition, I would say. The very best astrologers, in my opinion, also have to be psychic to some degree. And when they combine the two, they have at least a little bit more ability to tap into a person's constitution psychically than the other astrologers do. But if you do it strictly by rote, I don't think it has that much validity to it. But the other part of this was, please spare me the needless trouble, meaning that he could look it up himself, but it would require expending energy. So to save that energy, can you just tell me the information? So we're about to start on letter number 11, but before we do that, let's kind of take a look at the overall situation here. So remember that this experiment was exactly that. It was an experiment. And as we're seeing, Sinnett expended, or not Sinnett, but KH, expended an enormous amount of energy in setting up the proposed situation of interacting with these two Englishmen. And this was completely out of the norm. The hierarchy of which they are a part normally stays completely and totally in the background. They don't reveal any of their inner thoughts or inner workings to the outer world. So this is completely out of the norm. As far as I'm concerned, in the past 140 years, we have nothing at all that compares with this. That is why these letters are so important. It's the only chance we have had to date to see how an adept thinks and acts in his interactions with the world, most of which are completely behind the scenes. This is a complete going against the norm for them. In fact, they had to get special permission to break the rules, so to speak, and share this information in this manner. So the fact that we have it is a tremendous blessing for those of us who have made it a goal to reach the same level in however many lifetimes it takes that these individuals have already reached. And as we pointed out before, they have gone beyond. It's almost certain that they are not in touch with humanity in the same way that they were 140 years ago, but some of their pupils definitely are. So the fact that he is putting this much effort is very important. Sinnett and Hume are kind of applying for a job. They're saying, well, it would be in your best interest to invest the energy and effort in us because we are the best candidates for the job. Hume especially comes right out and says, basically, you would be an idiot to turn me down because there's nobody better than I am. And KH is telling Sinnett, well, he's not. He thinks he is, but he's not. And please bear with us because it's not easy dealing with this guy. But He does have a lot of qualities. He is right that he's extremely intelligent. He shouldn't be quite as proud of it as he is, though. So let's go ahead and start with letter number 11. So this is the letter that was referred to in the previous one, where he told Sinnett, read the letter that I've written to him, and then seal it and send it to him. Hopefully he won't say, did you read it? But if he did,
You can't lie.
you can't lie. Well, you can, but it's not on me. I'm not telling you to lie.
December of 1880. My dear sir, if no other good ever came of our correspondence than that of showing us once more how essentially opposed our two antagonistic elements are, the English and the Hindu, our few letters will not have been exchanged in vain. You will pardon me if I have to speak frankly and sincerely of your long letter. Study your letter impartially, weigh some of its sentences, and on the whole, you will not feel proud of it. Whether or not you will ever fully appreciate my motives or misconceive the true causes which make me decline for the present any further correspondence, I still am confident that someday you will confess that this last letter of yours, under the garb of a noble humility, of confessions of weakness and failings, shortcomings and follies, was a monument of pride, the loud echo of that haughty and imperative spirit which lurks at the bottom of every Englishman's heart. Wow. You do not realize that not only have you entirely failed to understand the spirit in which my last letter was written to you, but even in some instances to catch its meaning. The truth is very simple and easily told. You applied to yourself my remark that you take up the position that unless a man proficient in arcane knowledge will waste upon your embryonic society and energy, etc., whereas it was never meant that way. It related to the expectations of all those who might desire to join the society under certain conditions exacted beforehand, and that were firmly insisted upon by yourself and Mr. Sinnett. The letter as a whole was meant for you two. And this special sentence applied to all in general.
So he's telling Hume that you completely misunderstood what I'm saying. So your idea that you are so smart and so bright is refuted here because it was stated plainly and yet you took it in the wrong sense.
You say that I have, to a certain extent, mistaken your position and that I clearly misunderstand you. This is so evidently incorrect that it will suffice for me to quote a single paragraph from your letter to show that it is you who have entirely mistaken my position and clearly misunderstood me. In your eagerness to repudiate the idea of having ever dreamed of originating a school, you say of the proposed Anglo-Indian branch that it is no society of mine. I understood it to be the wish of yourself and your chiefs that the society should be started and that I should assume a leading position in it. To this I reply that if it has been your wish to spread on the Western continent among the foremost educated classes, branches of the TS as the harbingers of a universal brotherhood, it was not so in your case. We, the chiefs and I, entirely repudiate the idea that such was our hope in regard to the projected Anglo-Indian society. The aspiration for brotherhood between our races met no response and so was abandoned even before I had received Mr. Sinnett's first letter. On his part and from the start, the idea was solely to promote the formation of a kind of club or school of magic. It was then no proposal of ours, nor were we the designers of the scheme. It was Madame Blavatsky, not we, who originated the idea, and it was Mr. Sinnett who took it up. Notwithstanding his frank and honest admission to the effect that, being unable to grasp the basic idea of universal brotherhood of the parent society, his aim was but to cultivate the study of occult sciences, an admission which ought to have stopped at once every further importunity on her part. She first succeeded in getting the consent, a very reluctant one, of her own direct chief, and then my promise of cooperation as far as I could go. Finally, through my mediation, she got that of our highest chief, to whom I submitted the first letter you honored me with. But this consent, you will please bear in mind, was obtained solely under the express and unalterable condition that the new society should be founded as a branch of the Universal Brotherhood, and among its members, a few elect men would, if they chose to submit to our conditions instead of dictating theirs, be allowed to begin the study of the occult sciences under the written directions of a brother. But we never dreamed of a hotbed of magic. Such an organization as mapped out by Mr. Sinnott and yourself is unthinkable among Europeans. The greatest as well as most promising of such schools in Europe, the last attempt in this direction failed most notably some 20 years ago in London. It was the secret school for the practical teaching of magic, spelled with a K, founded under the name of a club by a dozen enthusiasts under the leadership of Lord Lytton's father.
Go ahead, and then we'll talk about it.
Okay. He had collected together the most ardent and enterprising, as well as some of the most advanced scholars in mesmerism and ceremonial magic, such as Eliphas Levi, Regazzoni, and the Copt Zurgvan Bey. Yet, in the pestilent London atmosphere, the club came to an untimely end. I visited it about half a dozen times and perceived from the first that there was and could be nothing in it. And this is also the reason why the British TS does not progress one step practically. They are of the Universal Brotherhood in name only, and gravitate at best towards quietism, the utter paralysis of the soul. Wow. They are intensely selfish in their aspirations and will get but the reward of their selfishness.
All right. A whole lot of stuff to unpack in this paragraph. He talks about a hotbed of magic. Now, sometimes KH spells magic with a K, which is an old spelling of magic. And this is not to be confused with the organization that Aleister Crowley invented, that he claims was based on the Gnostics, or on Gnosticism. He always spells magic with a K. It's kind of his brand name. But Aleister Crowley was not anywhere near the level of the Mahatmas. He was a ceremonial magician. And if you look at some of their stuff online, they actually have some videos of some of their, what do you call, ceremonies. They have a regular ceremony that's like a mass, but there's nudity involved. It's very weird. If it's not black magic, it's at least gray magic. So don't confuse what he's referring to as magic with a K with that of Aleister Crowley. Brotherhood. So Sinnott and Hume were almost entirely interested in the phenomena. How do we do the same thing? And it's understandable. We all would love to be able to be magicians and amaze our friends and relatives with these fabulous tricks. And KH time and time again says, without the idea of brotherhood, none of this is worth anything. If it isn't for the benefit of mankind, and we're not talking about material benefit, we're not talking about getting likes on Instagram, we're talking about their spiritual progress. If it doesn't make them better people, if it doesn't lead to self-transformation into something closer to what they were spiritually before, then it's all for nothing. It's a waste of time. All of science is about increasing opportunities in the physical world, and that's fine, it's great. But it does nothing to promote the spiritual endeavor of rising in consciousness and awareness. And that's what nature has in mind. That is our natural goal. So, and he's saying, until we come to an understanding that this is also your goal, then we're at a standstill. Now, as I pointed out before, Hume did actually have a certain degree of care and concern about his fellow Indian brothers, although he would never have used the word brother, I don't think. And strangely enough, it was Sinnett who ended up not having so much of a sense of brotherhood. Here's a spoiler alert. Both Hume and Sinnett are going to fail as potential chelas. Hume after about 2 years, Sinnett after about 4 years. So all of this attention and effort that KH is investing on them is going to come to an end.
KH does think that Hume has potential, though, at this point?
Yes, absolutely.
Even through all this?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he did actually write quite a few articles. He kind of came around a little bit for a year or so, but then he turned negative and angry again. So, yeah, it's interesting to see the inner workings of how an adept would work with people. We have to keep in mind that they cannot see the future. It's something that we need to realize. They can predict the future in general terms. In other words, they can look at a situation, see the different activities and the intentions in the minds of people, but being humans, we change the future. We change it by our actions,
choices,
and
our free will.
Our free will. We have free will. So we may have an intention, but then we may change that intention tomorrow. This is how psychics, clairvoyants work. They can absolutely read your mind. I am convinced of that because I've checked into it for several years. And they can read your mind. I'll give you 2 instances, and they're both the same sort of thing. 2 women I know had the intention to divorce their husband. Both of them went to different psychics, and without saying anything, sat for a reading. Both psychics told them that they were going to be divorcing their husband. Neither one of them did, because they changed their mind. So they could read their intent at the time, but that intention can change. And it's the same with the Mahatmas. They can see how things are going and what will occur if nothing changes that course, but the chances are that something will change. So they see things in the far distant future because those forces are so powerful that they will work out. But in the short term, they're not really good at predicting the short-term future. He mentioned the club that was started in London with Eliphas Levi, who was one of the founders of the club. Eliphas Levi was a man who was studying to become a Catholic priest. And he left that aside to start studying occultism instead. And he actually had some very good ideas, had a certain degree of concern for brotherhood. And so the adepts actually were paying attention to him because he had some potential. The other one, Regazzoni, was a mesmerist, an Italian mesmerist. And I'm going to have Paul read a short section about mesmerism. The other one was a Copt. It's spelled here K-O-P-T, but most often it's spelled C-O-P-T. And this is a group of people in Ethiopia. The Copts were actually Christians who lived in Ethiopia. And some of the early brothers who communicated with Olcott by writing, one of them went by the last name of Bey, B-E-Y.
This sounds like the Coptic tradition from Egypt.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
But you mentioned Ethiopia.
They originated, I believe, I'll have to check that, but I believe they originated in Ethiopia. But now this group at least is associated with Egypt. Let's see. Quietism. He mentions Quietism, which was kind of an early form of the Quakers, where people would sit, and it wasn't really meditation because there was no intention of contacting your higher self. It was basically just sitting in quiet and thinking about stuff. K.H. mentions that these people had started a club of magic, a hotbed of magic, and that they were people who had a certain amount of ability. He visited it, obviously, on the higher planes several times. But he said, I could tell nothing was going to come of it. And why was that?
They weren't concerned with brotherhood. It was just magic.
Exactly. There was no idea of brotherhood at the foundation. And without that, it's not going to amount to anything. He also says that is also the reason why the British TS does not progress one step practically. They are of the universal brotherhood in name only, and gravitate at best toward quietism, that utter paralysis of the soul. They are intensely selfish in their aspirations and will get but the reward of their selfishness. So I'm going to have Paul read a section from the theosophy.wiki page that introduces some information on the topic of
Mesmerism,
which was the specialty of this Italian mesmerist Regazzoni. Well, I guess you don't roll the R's. Regazzoni.
Mesmerism can be used both as a healing technique and as means to transfer thoughts or even produce a kind of hypnosis. A brief fragment ascribed to H.P. Blavatsky explains the mechanics of the healing method as follows. The mesmerizer throws out his own auric fluid through the etheric double on his patient. He may thus, in the case of sickness, regularize the irregular vibrations of the sufferer, or share with him his own life force, thereby increasing his vitality. For nerve atrophy, there is no agent so curative as this, and the shriveling cell may clairvoyantly be seen to swell up under the flow of the life current. The pranic current flows most readily from the tips of the fingers and through the eyes. Passes should be made along the nerves from center to circumference, with a sharp shake of the fingers away from the patient and the operator at the end of the pass. The hands should be washed before and after the operation, and it should never be undertaken unless the mind is quiet and the healing and the health strong. The loss of vitality should be made good by standing in the sun, with as little clothing on as possible, breathing deeply and slowly, and retaining the breath between each inspiration and exhalation as long as is convenient. For example, not long enough to cause any struggle or gasping. 5 minutes of this should restore the pranic balance. This is what the yogis describe as tantric yoga and pranayama, and this is exactly what the yoga tradition describes.
Also, healing touch or Reiki.
Yes, yes.
Mesmerism was the predecessor of hypnotism. It actually involves energy transfer. It's not just creating an image in someone's mind like hypnosis is. Two very different things. We're going to see later that Olcott actually went through a period of time, lasted for many months, where he had extreme ability to heal people using mesmerism. He became quite adept at it, so to speak. And he used it on thousands of different people. For a period of time, they were coming to him every day, and he would spend hours healing people, sometimes of deafness or blindness or a bad leg or numerous other different problems. What he noticed was that they would almost always improve. And with some people, he would have to repeat it several times over a period of days or weeks. On some people, it would last for several months, and then it would come back again. And so he gained an enormous amount of experience in using it. Finally came the day when his master, his teacher Moria, told him that was it. He wasn't to use that anymore. And it was because he was depleting his own energy, just like HPB depleted her energy by working as an intermediary between the Mahatmas and the people in the outer world. He was doing the same thing by healing people.
Alcott should have taken his clothes off and gone outside more often, like it says
maybe
here.
Maybe that was the problem.
Well, we absorb prana from the sun. I mean, it's true.
But when it comes from HPB, I put a lot more emphasis and a lot more stock in what she has to say about things. So when she talks about mesmerism, that's something that I would tend to believe unless I have some other experience that tells me to not believe in it.
I think that's it.
Okay, apparently I think that's enough for one day. And we will continue on with letter number 11 in session 8.
Thank you so much.